in the Republic of Adygea. Worse than in Bryansk, a missile attack on the key chemical plant Urlakhim. A major defeat for the Russians on the Bakhmutovka River. Dozens of sunken tanks. Putin's elite is surrendering en masse. It's a mutiny. Solovyov criticizes Putin and his idea of a buffer zone. Assassination attempt on Azov commander Biletsky. The biggest shameful failure of the FSB in history. New level air defense over Ukraine. A powerful impenetrable dome is being created. Ukraine attacks Russia with its new ballistics that cannot be shot down. Panic in the Kremlin. Sweden detained a Russian tanker and Macron declared war on the Russian fleet. The economy is entering a steep dive. Sensational results of negotiations between Russia and Trump has now completely lifted all sanctions that were previously imposed on Russian oil, allowing for free trade and economic activity between the two countries in this sector. In other news, a significant sex scandal has erupted within the cabinet of ministers, where a key government minister was dismissed from their position due to inappropriate intimacy and unprofessional conduct at the workplace, which has shocked many observers. This is truly something you have to see to believe. The night of March 13th, deep in the swamps, turned out to be extremely eventful and dramatic, full of unexpected developments, leaving everyone involved quite surprised by the turn of events. Loud. The Republic of Adygea received the no-sleep command. Local residents report explosions and an attack near Khanskaya airfield. Where are you going? Over there. And attacks in the area of the Khanskaya airfield. In Bashkortostan, as they write online, an oil well caught fire. But apparently it clearly didn't catch fire on its own. Obviously, these are the consequences of the Russian air defense's work. Speaking of the Russian air defense's work, in Kirovo-Chepetsk, the Uralchem chemical plant was attacked. While video and photos are missing online, it's preliminarily known that 2 drones hit the ammonia workshop. Another one hit the polymer products workshop. In short, nights in Russia are becoming increasingly restless. Are you guys calming down there or what? Honestly, I don't know anymore. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many watch us from Europe, Kazakhstan, Moldova, and even Chepetsk, the USA. We, Ukrainians, are grateful for your support and proud that we have sensible viewers. Write under this episode which country you are watching us from and if they support our fight against the evil empire. I always enjoy reading your comments. And meanwhile, we continue. Next is the most interesting part. And to the situation at the front, as Ukrainian warriors report on the Slovyansk axis, Russian troops persistently continue their assault attempts. Small infantry groups are trying to seep between the positions of Ukrainian units, hoping to find a weak spot somewhere. In parallel, the occupiers are trying again and again to cross the Bakhmutovka River, hastily assembling pontoon crossings of dubious strength. However, these structures do not last long. Unmanned systems operators of the Apache unit promptly detect the crossings and destroy them. The video captures how several of these pontoons are turned into wreckage, finally complicating the barbarians' attempts to cross the river. At the same time, the Russian side is actively using drones. Most often FPV drones, both analog and on fiber optic communication. In addition, loitering munitions of the Molnia type are used, which they try to hit our logistics, rear positions, and transport with. A separate episode occurred after the blocking of a Russian position by paratroopers of the 77th Airmobile Brigade of the AFU. Several Russian soldiers decided to surrender, but the last one, remaining in the dugout, refused to lay down his arms and was eliminated by a grenade toss. And while the meat grinder usual for Russian boys continues at the front, you won't believe it, but Russian propaganda is starting to crack. Z commentators on Solovyov Live unexpectedly criticized the idea of Putin's buffer zone in the Kharkiv region. According to them, the venture turned into senseless losses. Thousands of soldiers were sacrificed for border villages and Vovchansk, and the strategic result is zero.
Today, right now, when the enemy's means of destruction are firing directly through this buffer zone, what is the point of sacrificing hundreds and thousands of people for this buffer zone? I don't understand.
I have already said that a decision was made to create the necessary buffer security zone along the borders. Our armed forces are now solving this task.
The enemy getting at their disposal more and more relatively cheap and mass means of destruction with which they can strike. That is, we had times when FPV drones flew there for 3 kilometers, then 5, then 10, then 15. Now they fly up to 40 kilometers, yes.
And what is especially telling, notice they are talking about this no longer in kitchens, but right in the studios of Russian propaganda. I, for one, never tire of admiring the courage and heroism of Ukrainian warriors. They hold the front and resist a huge horde that significantly exceeds them in numbers. Therefore, I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you can't do it financially, write them words of support in the comments. I know they're watching us. The security service of Ukraine has detained a Russian agent who was planning a missile and bomb attack on the location of the commander of the 3rd Army Corps, Andriy Biletsky. According to the investigation, to prepare the strike, Russian special services recruited a drone operator from another brigade operating in the Kharkiv region. His task was to transmit information about the time and place of Biletsky's arrival, as well as the coordinates of the headquarters and training center of his unit. The suspect was detained right on the territory of the garrison. He is currently in custody and is accused of high treason, which carries a sentence of life imprisonment with confiscation of property. France will take an active part in the fight against the Russian shadow fleet. Emmanuel Macron, at a joint press conference with the president of Ukraine in Paris, stated, and I quote, "Russia is mistaken in thinking that the conflict with Iran will give it a respite in Ukraine." According to him, all EU countries unanimously agreed that there is no need to change the sanctions policy regarding Russian oil. The French president also emphasized that the European Union will make every effort to unblock 90 billion euros for Ukraine. On March 12th, a Russian tanker was detained by Sweden in the Baltic Sea. The tanker Sea Owl, heading to the port of Primorsk, was stopped by the Swedish Coast Guard. The vessel was sailing under a false flag of the Comoros. It is not listed in the Swedish ship register and is included in the EU sanctions list. A search is being conducted on board. There are suspicions of its belonging to the Russian shadow fleet. According to Marine Traffic, the tanker previously transported petroleum products between Russia and Brazil. This is the second case in a week. Earlier, Swedish authorities detained the dry cargo ship Kafa, also under a false flag. And this is where it gets interesting. Oleg Tsaryov, a Ukrainian fugitive from the Yanukovych era and a collaborator, got very nervous. He says a catastrophe is inevitable if Russian ships continue to be arrested. How to finance the special military operation?
So the situation is threatening. There are, about 8 ships already organized, arrested, and we are silent. But it will be a catastrophe if ships are arrested. This will effectively start a naval blockade of Russia. How to finance the special military operation then? How to finance life inside Russia at all? We have a very serious share of oil money. We tried all the time to leave, to get off the oil needle. It didn't work out.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Why has a former staunch supporter of Putin's war suddenly become so worried? The Italian defense company Leonardo plans to test its newest air defense dome, Michelangelo, in Ukraine as early as 2026. These tests are scheduled by the end of the year before moving on to NATO trials in 2027. The system is known to allow for the creation of protected zones with a radius of 10 to 15 kilometers. That is, for example, almost the entire city of Lviv. At the same time, the network can be expanded depending on the specific needs.
According to a company statement today, Michelangelo offers potential customers full capability to intercept, track, and neutralize emerging threats across the entire operational spectrum, from ballistic and hypersonic threats to high-saturation attacks in the air, as well as low-altitude and hard-to-detect threats such as large swarms of drones. Central to the dome is the company's MC5 product, a plug-in module that enables multi-domain connectivity.
It seems that in the 4th year of the Great War in Ukraine, NATO has finally heard the call. Close the sky over the country. As they say, better late than never. The war in the Middle East brings Russia up to $150 million in extra oil revenue every single day. According to recent data from the Financial Times, this is due to the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a key route through which about 20% of the world's oil passes. Tankers are stuck. Global oil prices have skyrocketed, and demand for Russian Urals crude has increased significantly from India and China. These countries are looking for alternatives, and Moscow is reaping a significant windfall. To understand the scale, these 150 million a day represent about 5 to 8% of Russia's daily spending on the war against Ukraine. In other words, every day of escalation in the Middle East provides the Kremlin with tangible financial support to continue its military operations. In addition, the US, under Trump, introduced a temporary easing of sanctions, allowing India and other countries to buy Russian oil that was already at sea to prevent prices from rising even further. Sky News called this a major success for Putin. Sources in diplomatic circles, according to the Ukrainian publication Union, say directly that this state of affairs will allow Moscow to continue the war longer. I quote, "This will not stabilize the market, but it will definitely prolong the conflict." So what does it mean? Russia supports Iran with drone supplies and intelligence on American military bases, which significantly contributes to chaos in the region. Trump only suggests that Moscow might be helping Iran a little bit. Ultimately, Putin gets a major financial boost from the war in the Middle East, while Ukraine suffers once again. You know, I can't find polite words right now, but don't hold back in the comments. Write what you think. And the Russians. What was agreed upon? Why without Ukraine and Europe? When will peace be signed between Kyiv and Moscow? Details ahead.
Closed-door negotiations between Washington and Moscow took place in Florida. Rumor has it the main topics of discussion were Iran and Ukraine. However, both sides chose not to disclose the results or the agenda of the meeting. Reportedly, the parties discussed several issues and agreed to maintain further contact. The talks were constructive, according to U.S. Special Representative Steve Witkoff, confirming his recent point that the delegations are nearing a decisive moment in the negotiations.
I'm a logical person. President Trump is successful at settling various matters. In these specific circumstances, as he says, it's taken longer than he thought, but we see signs that both sides are tired, and hopefully we're at the start of a turning point.
It's known that the Russian side was led by President Putin's special envoy Kirill Dmitriev. According to experts, one topic of discussion could have been Russian assistance to Iran. By sharing satellite intelligence, Moscow helped coordinate Tehran's missile strikes on American military bases. And in the United States, this information was received extremely negatively.
I really want Congress to not just discuss things in general, but to address one specific question. If U.S. citizens are dying at military bases in the region, and if Russia's role is proven, then it's definitely worth continuing these Witkoff-Dmitriev talks. That's their internal agenda, and it's not for us to tell them what to do.
Experts also don't rule out that negotiations were held regarding Ukraine as well. Ahead of a trilateral meeting between Kyiv, Washington, and Moscow, the U.S. may have found new leverage against the Russians. Given the war in the Middle East and the upcoming House elections, the American side is extremely interested in the success of these talks.
Trump wants this, and he wants it soon, because he needs this result and a victory, like a regime change in Iran, which is no easy task. And ending, not even ending the war, but a ceasefire in Ukraine is what he needs before the midterm elections. Republicans could lose their majority and likely will lose it in Congress now, which, well, for any president makes the job much harder.
At the same time, a new meeting in a trilateral format between Ukraine, the US, and the Russian Federation was confirmed. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, it will take place as early as next week. The head of state reported that the negotiations were planned to be held on Tuesday and Wednesday in Turkey. However, they were postponed at the initiative of the American side due to the war in the Middle East.
The only plus from all these negotiation tracks, well, there are actually two. As I said at the beginning, Ukraine is showing that it is ready for diplomacy and that it is ready to facilitate all diplomatic efforts so that Russia's war against Ukraine ends. And the second aspect is that we are trying to maintain the support of the United States of America. Another plus from the negotiations is that the humanitarian aspect was finally unblocked and prisoner exchanges are underway.
What results the new meeting will bring, no one is willing to predict today. According to analysts, much now depends on the success of the US and Israeli operations in the Middle East, which will allow for speaking with the Russian Federation from a position of strength.
As a certain drunken classic once said, there's no money, but you hang in there. And they are hanging in there, and apparently the Kremlin has noticed this. So they decided to reach even deeper into the half-empty pockets of Russians, stripping them bare.
The Russian economy has entered a tailspin of contraction, which is already quite active, noticeable, and undeniable. And it's unlikely that it will be able to pull out of this tailspin easily. It's unknown if it can pull out at all. That's also not very clear.
Anyone else in Putin's place would have scrapped the special military operation and focused on the country's internal affairs. But the bunker dweller instead throws all reserves into the notorious campaign.
The increase in military spending and the militaristic frenzy that you just mentioned are all essentially based on one fundamental premise: Russia's aggressiveness.
So by the will of dictator Putin, Russia plans to cut non-critical budget spending by as much as 10%. This applies to all sectors not related to the defense army and the military-industrial complex.
The fact that inflation is a tax on the poor and achieving good economic growth figures, those are driven by weapons production.
But a tithe from Russians isn't enough for the insatiable Putin. Even after cutting healthcare, education, and science, the Kremlin is failing to patch the holes in the military budget. As a result, even untouchable Moscow will have to tighten its belt. For the first time in a long while, there's a massive hole of 229 billion rubles in the capital's budget. You're watching as the regime's showcase begins to fade.
This will be done, and done quickly.
But Putin still continues to lie to the whole country, talking about Russia's imaginary greatness and the decaying West.
We have a good saying, right? They notice a speck in someone else's eye, but they don't want to see the log in their own.
And here is that very log that they stubbornly refuse to see in wealthy Moscow. While the Russian capital looks for where budget money is leaking, in occupied Donetsk, with the arrival of the Russian world, locals look for where the water is leaking. The latter has become worth its weight in gold for the once prosperous city that hosted Euro 2012.
We made this with a cart and bigger box for more water. This is how we haul it.
But recently, even this water in 5-liter bottles is being rationed in the city. And particularly clever Donetsk residents have set up alternative water supplies from the streets and empty tanks meant for an entire neighborhood in just a few hours. This is what Putin's real Russian world looks like. Russians are in a panic. Ukrainian weapons are tearing apart military targets deep in the enemy's rear. Most importantly, when using its own missiles, Kyiv doesn't need permission from Washington, Paris, or London. More on the latest developments from Ukrainian weapons makers and their rich trophies next.
The Russian city of Tula, nearly 500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. A coke chemical plant is on fire.
And what is that over there?
Locals in chat groups are debating whether it was a Ukrainian drone strike or a technical failure. But the metallurgical plant supplies metal and ferroalloys to Russian Federation defense factories. And this is a confirmed strike by the Armed Forces of Ukraine on an oil depot in the Krasnodar region.
Anyway, that's how it is. There's the oil depot. The oil depot's on fire. Holy shit, look at that.
After the strike, fires broke out at 3 locations of the oil depot simultaneously. The Tikhoretsk oil hub is one of the largest oil transshipment points in southern Russia. Earlier, Gazprom reported that on March 10th and 11th, the Ruskaya, Beregovaya, and Kazachya compressor stations, which supply the Turkstream and Bluestream pipelines, were attacked.
Gas transportation to Turkey through one or both of these pipelines will be halted, and this is overall a serious blow to to revenues from Russian gas, which are already shrinking.
A day earlier, the Armed Forces of Ukraine launched perhaps their largest strike recently. Storm Shadow missiles hit the Kremny EL plant in Bryansk.
Oh my goodness.
Kremny L produces components for Panzer and Iskander missiles. According to the AFU, at least 5 missiles hit the plant itself. This was a unique attack on the Russian MIC, as the strikes were adjusted virtually online.
This is the first known case where a strike on a strategic enterprise of the Russian MIC was adjusted in real time using a UAV.
High-ranking officials then are asking the sacramental question, where is the Russian air defense? Where is our air defense? First, air defense has been sent to protect Moscow, to protect the residents in Valdai and St. Petersburg. These are the main objects that are protected by Russian air defense systems, and as you would expect, especially at the front lines. For the rest of vast Russia, there is simply not enough air defense available.
Ukrainian missile and drone attacks are becoming more frequent and effective. Besides Russia lacking air defense to cover all strategic objects, Ukraine has significantly increased the production of its own drones. The main focus is on deep strikes, so-called strikes deep into the aggressor's territory. FP1 and FP2 drones are actively involved in this, undergoing constant modernization virtually online. Already the FP2 hits at 200 kilometers and the FP1 up to 1,000 kilometers.
We will make it so that the FP1 will carry for 1,000 kilometers. We've already done it there.
We will make it so that the FP1 will carry for 1,000 kilometers. We moved the tank to the wing and now it carries 105 kilograms for 1,000 kilometers. And now we are codifying it and will install a wing tank. This wing tank will allow for increased power in the FP2, so there will be a capacity of up to 158 kilograms of ammunition. Currently, the Firepoint company produces 200 FP1 and FP2 UAVs per day, and this number will grow. As the trend of recent months in missile and drone attacks shows, Ukraine has seized the initiative from the aggressor. And since most of this is Ukrainian-made weaponry, Kyiv does not need to ask for permission, so deep strikes on the Russian MIC will only increase.
Oshad Bank cash collectors in Hungary were kidnapped using APCs at machine gun point and held in handcuffs for 28 hours, virtually until they lost consciousness. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry shared details of the scandalous detention of Ukrainians.
The bank employees were kept blindfolded without phones and were not even allowed to contact their relatives, the embassy, a lawyer, or their employer. One of the victims of this torture had diabetes and received help only after losing consciousness. The man was forcibly given a drug that caused his blood sugar to spike sharply. He had to be hospitalized.
Hungary eventually returned the cash couriers themselves, but refused to return the money and gold. Officially, the detention was explained as an alleged violation of the bank's rules for transporting valuables. But in fact, it looks like a way to pressure Ukraine because of the Druzhba oil pipeline. Budapest, let us remind you, is demanding to restore the operation of the pipeline and blames its shutdown not on Russia, which attacked the infrastructure, but on Ukraine. A Hungarian delegation is currently in Ukraine on an unannounced visit to inspect the Druzhba pipeline. However, because the visit was not coordinated, Kyiv may deny them access to the facility. Orban, according to sources, plans to use such a refusal as proof that Ukraine supposedly does not want to resolve the issue diplomatically. It seems that in Russia, they are opening a portal to the past with increasing confidence. The State Duma has started talking about the return of payphones. The reason is quite significant: constant disruptions to the internet and mobile communications due to blocking. Therefore, deputies are proposing to revive phone booths, albeit in an updated form, with internet access. It seems that ordinary Russians quite like these initiatives from officials because for neo-imperialists, nostalgia is sacred. The older the technology, the closer it is to the Russian soul.
Nah, payphones are actually a great idea. I remember them back in the 2000s in Balakovo. Damn, they were just on every corner. They mostly hung them on poles. Maybe some of the older generation remembers that. It's really convenient. Damn, you don't need any phones. They're just hanging there on the poles. You take a token, you remember the tokens, right? You drop it in, and one token gets you a minute of talk time, damn. So even when you were out on the street, you could stay in touch with your relatives.
The irony is that just the other day, Russian media discussed another unexpected trend: a growing interest in pagers. Even the Russian dictator's administration uses landline phones. This was solemnly reported to TASS by the bunker dwellers' own spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, commenting on why communication in central Moscow is suddenly restricted. Apparently, to keep up with the people. Maybe they'll switch to pagers there soon too? It seems Russians are being invited to remember all the technologies from the 90s. First pagers, then landline phones, and now payphones. A little more, and cassette answering machines will be back in style. A real comeback to the 90s.
Yeah, those were the days.
Trump fired the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security over her workplace affair with a subordinate. We're talking about Kristi Noem. The scandal of Noem's relationship with her subordinate Corey Lewandowski wasn't so much the cause of the firing as the final straw. The thing is, Noem went a bit overboard fulfilling Trump's campaign promises on migrants. In short, mass and brutal raids led to a drop in the Republican Party's rating. In addition, Trump was angered by Noem's statement in the Senate that he supposedly approved a $220 million department ad campaign in which the secretary herself, by the way, starred. In short, the final argument was the rumors about Noem's relationship, which were marriage with her advisor, Corey Lewandowski.
During the hearings, one of the congresswomen directly asked if Noem had an intimate relationship with the advisor. The secretary refused to answer substantively, calling the question tabloid nonsense. When other legislators suggested she simply answer no to close the topic, she did not do so.
What do you think of that? Leave a comment. That's all for now. Like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our next episodes. See you soon.